Robinson Crusoe, Chapter 14. Meditates his escape from the island, builds a canoe, failure of his scheme and resignation to his condition. He makes himself a new dress. All the while these things were doing, you may be sure my thoughts ran many times upon the prospect of land which I had seen from the other side of the island, and I was not without secret wishes that I were on the shore there, fancying the seeing the mainland, and in an inhabited country. I might find some way or other to convey myself farther, and perhaps at last find some means of escape. But all this while I made no allowance for the dangers of such a condition, and how I might fall into the hands of savages, and perhaps such as I might have reason to think far worse than lions and tigers of Africa. That if I once came into their power, I should run a hazard more than 1,000 to 1 of being killed, and perhaps of being eaten. For I had heard that the people of the Caribbean coasts were cannibals, or man-eaters, and I knew by the latitude that I could not be far off from that shore. Suppose they were not cannibals, yet that they might kill me, as many Europeans who had fallen into their hands had been served, even when they had been 10 or 20 together, much more I, that was but one, and could make little or no defense. All these things I say, which I ought to have considered well of, and did cast up in my thoughts afterwards, yet took up none of my apprehensions at first, but my head ran mightily upon the thoughts of getting over to the shore. Now I wished for my boy Jury and the longboat with the shoulder of mutton sail, with which I sailed above 1,000 miles on the coast of Africa, but this was in vain. Then I thought I would go and look at our ship's boat, which, as I have said, was blown up upon the shore a great way in the storm when we were first cast away. She lay almost where she did at first, but not quite, and was turned by the force of the waves and the winds, almost bottom upward, against a high ridge of beachy, rough sand, but no water about her as before. If I had had hands to have refitted her, and to have launched her into the water, the boat would have done well enough, and I might have got back into the Brazils with her easily enough. But I might have foreseen that I could no more turn her and set her upright upon her bottom than I could remove the island. However, I went to the woods and cut levers and rollers and brought them to the boat, resolved to try what I could do, suggesting to myself that if I could but turn her down, I might easily repair the damage she had received, and she would be a very good boat, and I might go to sea in her very easily. I spared no pains indeed in this piece of fruitless toil, and spent, I think, 3 or 4 weeks about it. At last, finding it impossible to heave it up with my little strength, I fell to digging away the sand to undermine it, and so to make it fall down, setting pieces of wood to thrust and guide it right in the fall. But when I had done this, I was unable to stir it up again, or get under it, much less to move it forward toward the water. So I was forced to give it over. And yet, though I gave over the hopes of the boat, my desire to venture over for the main increased, rather than decreased, as the means for it seemed impossible. This at length put me upon thinking whether it was not possible to make myself a canoe, or periagua, such as the natives of these climates make, even without tools, or, as I might say, without hands, viz., of the trunk of a great tree. This I not only thought possible, but easy, and pleased myself extremely with the thoughts of making it, and with my having much more convenience for it than any of the negroes or Indians. But not all considering the particular inconveniences which I lay under more than the Indians did, viz., want of hands to move it, when it was made, into the water, a difficulty much harder for me to surmount than all the consequences of want of tools could be to them. For what was it to me that when I had chosen a vast tree in the woods, I might with much trouble cut it down, if after I might be able with my tools to hew and dub the outside into the proper shape of a boat, and burn or cut on the inside to make it hollow, so as to make a boat of it, If, after all this, I must leave it just where I found it and was not able to launch it into the water? One would have thought I could not have had the least reflection upon my mind of any circumstances while I was making this boat, but I should have immediately thought how I should get it into the sea. But my thoughts were so intent upon my voyage over the sea in it that I never once considered how I should get it off the island. And it was really, in its own nature, more easy for me to guide it over 45 miles of sea than about 45 fathoms of land, where it lay, to set it afloat in the water. I went to work upon this boat the most like a fool that ever man did who had any of his senses awake. I pleased myself with the design, without determining whether I was ever able to undertake it. Not but that the difficulty of launching my boat came often into my head, but I put a stop to my own inquiries into it by this foolish answer which I gave myself: let's first make it. I'll warrant I'll find some way or other to get it along when it's done. This was a most preposterous method, but the eagerness of my fancy prevailed, and to work I went. I felled a cedar tree. I question much whether Solomon ever had such a one for the building of the Temple of Jerusalem. It was 5 feet 10 inches diameter at the lower part next to the stump, and 4 feet 11 inches diameter at the end of 21 feet, after which it lessened for a while and then parted into branches. It was not without infinite labor that I felled this tree. I was 20 days hacking and hewing at the bottom. I was 14 more getting the branches and limbs and the vast spreading head of it cut off, which I hacked and hewed through with axe and hatchet and inexpressible labor. After this, it cost me a month to shape it and dub it to a proportion and to something like the bottom of a boat, that it might swim upright as it ought to do. It cost me near 3 months more to clear the inside and work it so as to make an exact boat of it. This I did indeed without fire, by mere mallet and chisel, and by dint of hard labor, till I had brought it to be a very handsome perigois, and big enough to have carried 26 men, consequently big enough to have carried me and all my cargo. When I had gone through this work, I was extremely delighted with it. The boat was really much bigger than I ever saw a canoe or perigois that was made of one tree in my life. Many a weary stroke it had cost, you may be sure, and there remained nothing but to get it into the water. And had I gotten it into the water, I made no question but I should have begun the maddest voyage, and the most unlikely to be performed that ever was undertaken. But all my devices to get it into the water failed me, though they cost me infinite labor too. It lay about 100 yards from the water and not more. But the first inconvenience was it was uphill towards the creek. Well, to take away this discouragement, I resolved to dig into the surface of the earth, and so make a declivity. This I began, and it cost me prodigious deals of pain. But who grudges pain that have their deliverance in view? But when this was worked through, and this difficulty managed, it was still much at one, for I could no more stir the canoe than I could the other boat. Then I measured the distance of ground and resolved to cut a dock or canal to bring the water up to the canoe, seeing I could not bring the canoe down to the water. Well, I began this work, and when I began to enter into it and calculate how deep it was to be dug, how broad, how the stuff to be thrown out, I found that by the number of hands I had, being none but my own, it must have been 10 or 12 years before I should have gone through with it. For the shore lay high, so that at the upper end it must have been at least 20 feet deep. So at length, through with great reluctancy, I gave this attempt over also. This grieved me heartily, and now I saw, though too late, the folly of beginning a work before we count the cost, and before we judge rightly of our own strength to go through with it. In the middle of this work, I finished my 4th year in this place, and kept my anniversary with the same devotion and with as much comfort as ever before. For by a constant study and serious application of the Word of God, and by the assistance of His grace, I gained a different knowledge from what I had before. I entertained different notions of things. I look now upon the world as a thing remote, which I had nothing to do with, no expectation from, and indeed no desires about. In a word, I had nothing indeed to do with it, nor was I ever like to have. So I thought it looked as we may perhaps look upon it hereafter, viz., as a place I had lived in, but was come out of. And well might I say, as Father Abraham to Dives, between me and thee is a great gulf fixed. In the first place, I was removed from all the wickedness of the world here. I had neither the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, or the pride of life. I had nothing to covet, for I had all that I was now capable of enjoying. I was lord of the whole manor, or, if I pleased, I might call myself king or emperor over the whole country which I had possession of. There were no rivals. I had no competitor, none to dispute sovereignty or command with me. I might have raised shiploadings of corn, but I had no use for it. So I let a little grow as I thought enough for my occasion. I had tortoise or turtles enough, but now and then one has as much as I could put to any use. I had timber enough to have built a fleet of ships. I had grapes enough to have made wine, or to have cured into raisins, to have loaded that fleet when they had been built. But all I could make use of was all that was valuable. I had enough to eat and to supply my wants, and what was all the rest to me? If I killed more flesh than I could eat, the dog must eat it, or the vermin. If I sowed more corn than I could eat, it must be spoiled. The trees that I cut down were lying to rot on the ground. I could make no more use of them than for fuel, and that I had no occasion for but to dress my food. In a word, the nature and experience of things dictated to me upon just reflection that all the good things of this world are no farther good to us than they are for our use, and that whatever we may heap up indeed to give others, we enjoy just as much as we can use and no more. The most covetous, gripping miser in the world would have been cured of the vice of covetousness if he had been in my case, for I possessed infinitely more than I knew what to do with. I had no room for desire, except it was of things which I had not, and they were but trifles, though indeed of great use to me. I had, as I hinted before, a parcel of money, as well gold as silver, about 36 pounds sterling. Alas, there the nasty sorrow useless stuff lay. I had no manner of business for it, and I often thought with myself that I would have given a handful of it for a gross of tobacco pipes, or for a handmill to grind my corn. Nay, I would have given it all for 6 pennyworth of turnip and carrot seed out of England, or for a handful of peas and beans and a bottle of ink. As it was, I had not the least advantage by it or benefit from it, but there it lay in a drawer and grew moldy with the damp of the cave in the wet season. And if I had had the drawer full of diamonds, it had been the same case, and they had been of no manner of value to me because of no use. I had now brought my state of life to be much easier in itself than it was at first, and much easier to my mind as well as to my body. I frequently sat down to my meat and thankfulness, and admired the hand of God's providence which had thus spread my table in the wilderness. I learned to look more upon the bright side of my condition, and less upon the dark side, and to consider what I enjoyed, rather than what I wanted. And this gave me sometimes such secret comforts that I cannot express them, and which I take notice of here, to put these discontented people in mind of it, who cannot enjoy comfortably what God has given them, because they see and covet something that He has not given them. All our discontents about what we want appeared to me to spring from the want of thankfulness for what we have. And we'll pause here, and we'll continue with this chapter in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.